This sitting is now resumed. Prior to the suspension, this Honorable House was debating the Integrity and Public Life Bill 2018. To that, we now revert. Y'all remember for St. Michael's South?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to give support to this bill. And I believe, sir, as we started this morning with the Lord's Prayer, that this is a good place for us to start. Especially the part, sir, where it speaks to Lord, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Sir, and there are some who come to public life, and politics in particular, with a view that there is some honey waiting at the end of it all. And that politics, by virtue of being what it is, can lead a man or a woman into temptation. And that even those of us who come with the best of intentions, as many of us do when we start a political life, we should remember that it is said way back in the 1100s that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And sir, sometimes it is practical and smart to have something that prevents a man or a woman from going down the wrong road. And sir, I rise to support this bill because I believe, sir, this will help us and prevent us from going down the wrong road. The member for St. Joseph, sir, the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, sir, said to us at a smaller gathering that the law does not necessarily reach back into the past, especially when it is seeking to cast a punishment on a man, and therefore this bill, and when it becomes an act and it becomes law, does not allow us to go back and reach into the past. Sir, even if it was our intention to do so to catch anybody, maybe it should, but it does not. Sir, this bill should serve to anchor all of us who remain in this room, to help us remember why it is that we came into public life. And I am not trying to catch the bad guy, but I have to remember, sir, that all of us are prone to temptation, and the propensity and possibility may exist for us, even with the good and best of intentions, Mr. Speaker, sir, to do the wrong thing. And this bill seeks to prevent us from doing the wrong thing. And I therefore will wish to support it in the strongest possible way. And even though, sir, we do not extend into the past, and even though, sir, we have to be anchored now into the present, we have, sir, to be rooted in principle as we do so. And I am sure the covenant of hope, which most of us in this, or all of us, all 30 of us in this honorable place subscribe to, has the principles that will guide us all. And sir, it is those principles to which I now subject myself. And all of us in this room, though as the Attorney General said, we were not bound by law to do so, we have all declared our assets, so that when we leave this place, we will say, this is what we came with, and this is what we did, and now this, sir, is what we will leave with. But in many ways, sir, we are forced to this point today. Not that we weren't going to bring it, because we believe we were going to bring it anyway, but that the fierce urgency of this moment is wrapped up in many ways with the indecency of the last 10 years and the way Barbadians were treated. And that even now there are some things that nobody can explain. And so, sir, early in our term, we bring this bill so that we can separate ourselves from that which has obtained in the last 10 years. So that when we say we will bring a new form of governance to this country, we don't only say it, but that we put it, sir, into practice. This country, Mr. Speaker, sir, is open to business, but it will not be business as usual. Well, not the new normal that came to be associated with Barbados in the last 10 years. And I sir, was at a Calypso tent last night, and Section 15 of this bill speaks to the power of arrest. And there was a Calypsonian who sang last night, sir, about some former politicians, or they might still be, who need a rest. And many of them, sir, do need a rest. Because clearly what has obtained, sir, in the last 10 years in this country was not good enough. And even though all of us must subject ourselves to this, sir, I would hate to believe that at the end of our time, we have left a legacy for fellow Barbadians to follow any way associated with that of the last 10 years. It cannot be. But so how are we here at this point in our legislation? I remember, and many people in this house will remember, that there was a conversation around in the last administration around the Prevention of Corruption Act, and it was passed in 2012. But it was never proclaimed. And it made provision for Barbados to implement a number of international treaties to which we are signatory. But it also meant that people who were in this place would have to declare their assets, and that they had to abide by a code of conduct. And sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, it spoke very strongly against solicitation and bribery and those other things. I remember. But sir, it never happened. It was never proclaimed. And in 2012, I also remember that the former Prime Minister at a Democratic Labour Party meeting in the Bayland, sir, he spoke to the fact that the Democratic Labour Party administration at the time had this legislation to be brought and to be passed, and that the Barbados Labour Party opposition at the time, as it then was, had referred it to a select committee. And his exact words was that it was not yet law of Barbados because the opposition party had resisted it. I remember. He said the opposition party had resisted it. Those were his exact words. And that it was sent to a select committee, but that it could not stay there from everlasting to everlasting, and that it had to come out, and that it would be made the law of this land. And it never happened. It had nothing to do with the opposition. He also went on to say somebody must be afraid of the provisions in it. But it wasn't the opposition that was afraid of the provisions in it. So it does not surprise me that it was never proclaimed in this country. Sir, he said that there was also a companion piece of legislation. All this he said in 2012. That he said there was this companion piece of legislation called the Integrity in Public Life Bill, which will be passed in all of its stages before the dissolution of that parliament. That never happened either. And at another Democratic Labour Party meeting, because you will recall that the places where these conversations occurred was not with the public, Mr. Speaker, sir. These conversations occurred at Democratic Labour Party meetings. And at another Democratic Labour Party meeting in October of 2017, the former Prime Minister spoke to the fact that Barbados already had a Prevention of Corruption Act, 1929. This morning, the Attorney General said it was between the First and the Second World War. That's how old it was. But he said, this same Prime Minister who said in 2012 that there would be an act passed came back in 2017 and said that there already was one and that there was no need for something new. And that act of 1929 had the power to bring corrupt public officials to their knees. Well, I remember. And nothing happened in between that time. And sir, we know that the 1929 Act could not bring corrupt public officials to their knees. But the people of this country did so on May 24th. They said they will not stand for that. And that was not the kind of Barbados that they wish to live in. It was not the kind of governance that they expected from the people that they elected. So sir, here we are. All of us, all 30 of us, having declared our assets, having said this is what we have, and this is how we intend to govern the people of Barbados. But for me, integrity is such a big issue. It is bigger in many ways than that even which we debate. So all of us have parents. My mother, I believe, is perhaps the most proud she's ever been in her life now of her son. And many people in this room, I'm sure, have parents and siblings and family who are very proud of their children. I'm proud of you too, sir. But many people, if not all of us, have families, sir, who look to us and say, well done. And they're happy for us, and we carry not, sir, the burden of this, but the hopes and aspirations of a country, of communities that we grew up in, of the schools that educated us. We carry a lot with us when we stand here. I have a daughter. Sir, and Mr. Speaker, it would break my heart to conduct myself in a way that brings some dishonor to her. And integrity has to be bigger than the things that we come here to debate. I believe, sir, that they are. But as Barbadians, some things must be so offensive to who we are. We must find something so disdainful in many ways. As you could see in Barbados around the time of the election, that they prick the collective conscience of a country to the point where they say, we will not deal with that. And if anybody brings that kind of stain to public life, we don't want them either. And I believe many of us who now sit in this parliament do so not because we were great, and I think we were very great. I'm not disrespecting my colleagues, sir. But many of us stand here because the people said they had enough of the other kind of governance and that they don't wish to ever see it in Barbados again. And so even if we think we are great, it must not go to our heads to the point where we forget the people who put us here. I am thankful to the people of St. Michael's South for putting me here. And I am pleased with the people in St. Michael's South for not putting the other man here. Because they're saying, even though you may command the highest position, and a few from Christchurch West, but even though you may command the highest position, that even you are not above the way Barbadians wish to be governed. And sir, it is with that in mind, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I want to talk about a few more things. I want to talk, sir, first of all, about the kind of Barbados that all of us wish to live in. You know, Newton had a law. He had 3 laws of motion, but his first law of motion, he said, everybody continues in its state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line unless compelled by some external force to act otherwise. The rate of change of momentum is proportional to the applied force and takes place in the direction in which the force acts. That's number 2. And for I'm talking to the member for Christchurch West.
Please address.
So let me continue speaking to you.
Please address the chair, please.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, Sir. William, the member for Christchurch West, so the honourable member is being naughty. But the point was, sir, that everybody will continue in a state of rest. Barbados is a country. Unless we had come to this house, sir, and made a definitive statement about the state of this country, we would have stayed exactly where we were. Either stagnant as a country, or proceeding down a line, sir, that Barbadians had clearly said they don't want. And that everybody continues in a state of rest or uniform motion. And that when we come here to discuss this bill and pass it into legislation, we are saying that we will not allow this country to stay now where it is. Because that is not the country that we wish to live in. And it's not the country we wish to die in or for our children to grow in. And we make a definitive statement. True to form, the opposition leader has brought out some points today, so some of which I agree with. The reality is, if we said we were going to do one thing, we have to do it. If we say it's going to be X amount of penalties, then it has to be. And the Attorney General has said so, and it will be so. Because we have been so far the kind of government that has said it is going to do a thing and has done that thing. Promise made, promise kept. That has been the way we have operated, sir. But in terms of integrity, I remember in 2008, I remember when the government changed and there were so many promises made to young people in this country that this new government was going to look after their interests, that Democratic Labour Party government, sir. Mr. Speaker, they made all kinds of promises to the young people of this country. And what did they get in the deal? Before the end of their 10 years, young people had to pay for university. Before the end of their 10 years, young people couldn't get a job. Youth unemployment skyrocketing. Sir, I remember when they came into office, they promised those in the cultural industries, all kinds of things. And they didn't get it yet. Nurses and police and teachers, I think, as well, were going to be able to get duty-free cars. And they didn't see it yet. All kinds of things were promised to people and never delivered. Where integrity has to matter for something. All of these things promised, and none of them delivered. Sir, small businesses in this country, in the last 10 years, you have seen the closure of the most small businesses in this country. And people who have shops in all the constituencies in here, you just got to go in a corner shop and you will see the shelves empty, but no cashing back the shelves. But you would have seen the shelves empty because people ain't got nothing to sell. And the very thing which has rooted Barbados, sir, has been our capacity to trust one another. And you can't go to a single shop, a small man, and say, let me borrow a little cent, or I will pay you back when I get the money, because people don't believe you anymore. So we've watched the erosion of trust as a principle in this country. That is why, sir, I look forward to the member for St. George South when he brings the legislation as it speaks to the trust loans and what that will do to rebuild the fundamental aspect of trust in this country. And I remember, sir, again, I'm calling on the opposition leader again, but I remember when he said, back then when he was a member of this great Barbados Labour Party, I still remember, you understand? But I remember him saying that if we want the people to trust us, that we have to trust the people. And Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir. It is for all of these reasons that, yes, I support this bill. But it is for all of these reasons that I believe we have to offer a new kind of governance to this country. In my constituency, when I walk through Britainsill and Bayland and those places, little children run up to me. They want to meet Kirk Humphrey, sir. And Mr. Speaker, they do so because they heard what we said on the platform. They heard the promises that we made. They saw the way our leader conducted herself. And if you're going to talk about integrity, sir, you have to talk about the way she was defamed, the Honorable Prime Minister, during an election, and the way in which she conducted herself in response. If you want integrity, that was integrity. And that is the way we have to govern this country. And so I now have the responsibility, sir, as Minister for Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, for dealing with the sargassum CV that comes on to our shores. The first time it came was in 2010, 2011. And you would believe, sir, in 2018, some 78 years later, that this is the first time it is here, that a country has no real response to it. That you have a number of young, promising business people in this country, whose names I can't call in here, some good people who just wanted a little help from the government to be able to turn that seaweed into fertilizer and into energy. Brilliant young Barbadian minds in need of a little support, and got none. And at the same time, I have responsibility for the port. And at the same time, you saw contracts of millions and millions of dollars with no real justification being given to certain people in this country, and young, bright minds trying to address a national problem at the same time couldn't get access to those loans. It is wrong. And we have to be a different kind of government. And that is why I have labored over the construction of the ports board. Because we know whoever is in charge of the port, and the Honorable Prime Minister, sir, has made it very clear that which obtained in the past cannot obtain now. And that everything we do must be done, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the public's interest. And that everything that we do must be made transparent to the public, because we cannot be a government of secrets. We have to be a government of the people and for the people. And so when we bring whatever we bring, sir, to the public, it will be for full discussion and full ventilation. And may we never get so arrogant, sir, as to bring something that we know does not suit the public's interest. But we are so committed to the cause because we said so, that even though something may not be in the public's interest and it does not sit well with the way Barbadians vision this country, that we do not stick to it. Because there has to be a point at which we say we are here acting for the people. And that is what integrity must mean going forward. I have no problem, sir, declaring my assets. It didn't take me very long to do it. I don't have a lot. But I was never one interested in gaining a lot. Most of the blessings I have came from God Almighty. And when I leave here, it is God Almighty that will bless me too. I came to serve. And at the end of the day, it is by service that we should be valued, and it is by service that we should be measured. So I just want to make it clear. There will come a point in public life, I've heard the Prime Minister say it several times, where perhaps your no's may have to outweigh your yeses. That you might have to start telling people no more often than you have to tell them yes. And one of the persons, sir, that you might have to tell no more often than not is yourself. You don't have to have everything, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, your constituents, as much as you love them and as much as you want to serve them, will have to understand that in a new Barbados and a new model of governance, where there is only one Barbados. And I feel very good sometimes when I see a road being done in Christchurch West. It happens for Barbados. I feel just as good, perhaps, as when he does the roads in St. Michael's South, which will be soon. I look forward, sir, because in this new Barbados filled with integrity, I look forward to the roads in King's Village being finished, and Beccles Hill, which is right behind the Prime Minister's office, being done. Because that is the way we will operate as a government. There is only one. And all of us, sir, have to look out for the interests of everybody else. And sir, even, Mr. Speaker, sir, even as you said there, we will have to make sure that the people in St. Michael's Central are well attended to too.
I'm very grateful for that.
Of course, sir. Because that is the way that we have to govern. Look, we have to put Barbados first. I mean, in all seriousness, we have to put Barbados first. A country that has given all of us so much, over the last 10 years has taken a beating. Our economy has taken a beating. Our society and that which made the fabric of Barbados great has taken a beating. Our international reputation that has separated us from many small island developing states, sir, has also taken a beating. Our capacity to be innovative and improvisational in our leadership has also taken a beating. In fact, in the last 10 years, one questions if there was any leadership whatsoever at all in this country. And we have now seen in the last 6 weeks since May 24th, since the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast assumed the leadership of this country, what leadership must look like in Barbados. And I am thankful, sir, to be part of the team that will repair the country, but also restore the integrity of a country that I believe has been lost. And so, sir, it is with those few words that I again wish to support the bill. Sir, it is with those few words that I continuously wish to remind Barbadians of what has happened in this country. And I know there are many Barbadians now who will not feel good unless somebody or something, some organization, is held accountable for what has happened in the last 10 years. So, sir, I am very happy to have heard the Honourable Attorney General and the member for St. Joseph speak the way he spoke this morning, because somebody has to be held accountable for this. In my constituency, I know a young lady who went to the supermarket unable to buy anything but wanted to feed her children. And I'm not saying it was right because she was wrong. And she took a few groceries, sir, and she was brought before the law courts rightfully and charged for taking some things to feed her children because it was wrong. And when you do wrong, you got to be punished, fair enough. But how in a country where somebody takes up a few tins of sardine and a macaroni has to face the full extent of the law, can it be fair that all kinds of people, because of the positions that they think they hold, can do all kinds of things without regard to the laws of this country and walk about this country like free men, if indeed that is the case? Sir, if it is so, it has to stop. And somebody has to be held responsible for what has happened in Barbados in the last 10 years. And so, sir, as I close, I wish again to support it. And to say to Barbadians that there is nothing to fear from this Labour Party in relation to us using their resources, because they don't belong to us, to do things to advance their interests, because that is why we are here. And that no matter how long we stay here, we only get to stay here because the people elect us. No man here, sir, is an island. No woman in this honourable chamber, sir, Mr. Speaker, is an island. We have to come back at some point to the people. And it is in the people's interest that we must always, always serve, sir. And sir, with those few words, I wish to thank you. I wish to thank the people of St. Michael South for giving me this opportunity. I'm obliged, sir.
The honourable member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I feel compelled to rise in full support of this Integrity and Public Life Bill because, sir, as a very young, brand spanking new politician, when I first came to public life seeking to represent the people of St. Michael South Central almost 2 years ago now, there was something that I found very disturbing in people's response. And it was the fact that people's minds, sir, could not compute that I would leave a job with a salary that was not so bad to run for office. And in fact, that I would leave before I had secured the nomination, because I had to leave before I had secured the nomination as the candidate for St. Michael South Central for the Barbados Labour Party. And then further, sir, that I would gratefully accept the opportunity to serve as the duly elected member in this cabinet at a salary that is lower than what I was making in my former job, or possibly would have the potential to make. And I say this in the full glare of my colleagues, the honorable members in this House, and the people of this country, because we seem to have this notion culturally in Barbados that money matters are supposed to be whispered about. But I do stand here today and say, yes, I walked away from a lucrative job because what was important to me and what remains important to me is to give back to this country that has given me so much. But I would say that I was disturbed, sir, by the reaction and by the notion that exists, or that existed at the time, that if somebody comes to offer themselves to serve at the highest level in this country, there must be some fiduciary motive. There must be some reason that is related to what you can get. We, as young politicians, stand on the shoulders of men and women who offered themselves to service and who gave so much to form a democracy of the substance as we now have in Barbados. That I was disturbed by the idea that after having been blessed with the likes of Sir Grantley Adams and Tom Adams and people of this stature, that we would allow the last 10 years of recklessness and disregard for rule of law to define for us what a politician looks like. That we would allow, sir, the reckless behavior of the last Democratic Labour Party administration to suggest to us that that is what a politician looks like. Well, I would like, through you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the people of Barbados to look around this chamber and to listen to what we propose under this Integrity and Public Life Bill, and to see that, in fact, this is what a politician looks like. People who are ready to declare their assets, people who are ready to say to the people of Barbados, we have nothing to hide. We stand before you fully accountable. We stand before you fully transparent, ready to do the work of the people of Barbados, because that is what we have come here to do. And it really concerned me that we would now use the indiscipline of the last 10 years as an example of what politics is or what politics brings. And if I do nothing else, as long as the people of St. Michael South Central and the people of Barbados give me the opportunity to serve, if I do nothing else, it is to prove to the people of Barbados that politician is and can be and should be an honorable thing to be. As I listened to the Honorable Member for St. Joseph, the Honorable Attorney General, deliver so well the arguments for this bill, I thought that this kind of legislation is necessary, not just because of what has obtained over the last 10 years, and not because the honorable members in this chamber do not intend to conduct themselves with integrity, but because, sir, we have to legislate not for the best among us, which I dare say is represented by the members here, but for the worst that may come. And so this type of bill has a preventative power. It is important for this discussion and for this legislation to exist in the public domain because it helps to set the atmosphere. It helps to create the environment for integrity, not just in public life, but in the country as a whole. You know, when I was growing up, my mother would be outside working in the garden or working in the yard, and she would call my name to come to her. And busy doing whatever I was doing, I would say yes, and then there would be complete silence, because the silence meant you cannot be serious. You are not saying yes. You mean to say that you are coming to see what I need. And similarly, there were times when she did not have to say a word. All she needed to do is to look at me in a certain tone of voice, as we say, and I would correct myself. And so I think that in many ways, legislation of this nature has to have this preventative power, so that even though it might not be in the nature or in the intent of the people currently serving, it is necessary to create the environment of equity and to create the environment of accountability so that people know that their resources, that their hard-earned dollars are being aptly taken care of. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the notion of integrity and accountability relates not just to financial resources and to large capital works, and I will get a bit later in my intervention to talk about the effect of corruption on the finances of a country. But accountability and integrity and the need for these things relates not just to large projects of the nature that were referenced by the Honorable Attorney General this morning, but really to the execution of every function and the use of every resource, be it influence or power or time. It is making sure, sir, that in every word you speak, in every hour you spend, that you remain accountable to the people of Barbados. And there's something that happened over the last 10 years. There's something that took hold. And it is because when you have poor governance at the top, you start to see the poor governance and the disrespect for rule of law, and really the notion that if those at the top do not have to do it, then why should I? It starts to take hold everywhere. Right. And so stealing money, if that were to happen, would be the same as stealing time. It would be the same as abusing the power of your position to bring undue pressure to bear on the people who work around you or the people who are accountable to you. And so when we speak of integrity, sir, we are not just speaking about procurement matters or the execution of large sums of money for large capital works projects, but we are talking about whether we give of the time that we are committed to give, whether that is at the highest levels of office or throughout the public service or anywhere. We are talking about certain levels of civility that we have come to expect as an orderly society, but sir, when people start to feel as if rules don't apply to other people, but they only apply to them, when people start to feel as if they are the target of oppressive practices while another group of people get away scot-free, then there are certain things that start to unravel in a society. And that is why sometimes you may see people claim to need time off when they don't need time off, because if they feel powerless and if they feel that that time is the only time that they have, they will take it. It is wrong. It should not happen. But it was allowed to happen, or it took hold, because of the levels of indiscipline that we saw over the last 10 years. And so if you are seeking to address integrity and accountability and transparency at one level, you have to be able to address it at all levels. Mr. Speaker, sir, there are costs of corruption. And I would not be able to sit where I sit with responsibility for economic affairs and investment and not speak to what some of those costs look like. And I recall that there was some work done some time ago, some years ago now, looking at what some of these costs of corruption are to an economy. And they were using a particular corruption index that was developed by Business International, and now we have other indices that we use. But those studies found certain things. One of those was that more corrupt countries have lower levels of growth in their GDP. And so there are all kinds of reasons for the lack of growth over the last 10 years, but I would dare suggest that the high levels of corruption was one of them. And why is that? Because the research also found that high levels of corruption deter investment. Corruption acts almost as a tax on foreign direct investment, and we know how that functions. We know that if someone is coming into a country seeking to make an investment of a certain size, but in order to have that business facilitated, they need to make a payment that is also of a certain size, that if that person has the kind of integrity that we would want to encourage, that they may choose to go elsewhere. And so the country suffers from the high burden of that tax because corruption acts as a tax on investment. And I should use this opportunity to say as well, sir, that while we speak to the notion of integrity in public life does not just include public officials. I'm going to repeat that. Public life does not just include those of us who work in the public sector. It takes two hands to clap. And I would like for us in the course of this debate to make clear that in our pursuit of the highest levels of its integrity and accountability, we may also be driven to uncover or to take issue with some practices in the private sector as well. Because for you to extend something, and when you withdraw your hand for it to be empty, someone on the other side must have taken it. Someone had to have extended the hand, and someone had to have accepted the gift. And even as some of those in the private sector bemoan the absence of accountability and transparency in procurement, as they should also be mindful of the fact that the lens of this Barbados Labour Party government is wide-reaching and has the capacity to sweep far beyond what we ordinarily consider the public domain if it involves acts by private citizens that have corrupted the public good. And so when we aim for the highest levels of integrity, we aim for the highest levels of integrity, Mr. Speaker, across the length and breadth of this country. Mr. Speaker, corruption, as we have seen in the last decade, also has the potential, as the studies show, to lower the quality of public infrastructure. We have spoken ad nauseum about the buildings at the Grotto and at Valerie. The fact that they were not subjected to the procurement rules to which they should have been, to the rules of the Financial Management and Audit Act of this country. And when you remove certain guidelines and certain rules for codes and for how a building should be constructed and the standards that it should meet, you find that you lower the quality of the infrastructure. Because if you are allowing a company or an individual access to a contract, to complete the contract, and as we saw with Valerie, to possibly complete the contract over budget, to complete the contract without having delivered all of the items of the building that needed to be delivered, then you are starting to compromise the quality of that infrastructure. And I will tell you, sir, that the residents of those buildings are paying the price today. Because there's hardly a day that passes that I do not receive a call with respect to something that is malfunctioning in those buildings at Valerie. And it is something that has to be thoroughly investigated, because this administration has to ensure that people are not paying the ultimate cost in their lives or well-being of the corruption that took place with respect to those buildings. Mr. Speaker, high levels of corruption limit expenditure on social sectors like education and health. And I would say that there is no other place that perhaps that we have a better example than that, than right here. Because when we look back across the last 10 years at projects that should have been properly implemented, often the ones that suffered the lack of implementation are those for which you possibly could not get very much steel in there. And those are projects like health and education, because what are those types of deliverables? You're not building a building. And so what we saw over the last 10 years is that if the project did not include some kind of structure going up for which someone could have been paid, it hardly got much attention. And so education projects and healthcare projects are the ones that suffer. Things that seek to deliver in the area of poverty reduction, those are the ones that suffer. And that is why, even though you would have heard a former minister of social care brag about how there were so few people on welfare, there were so few people on welfare because they excluded the people from welfare benefits. Because it is very, very difficult to make the kinds of gains that you could make on a welfare project as compared to a birth 6, for example. if one were to find an example.
That's 189 billion example.
So, Mr. Speaker, I say these things to say to the people of Barbados through you, sir, that we bring this bill not just because we want to be able to say that we have done it or that we have addressed integrity. We are very serious about the fact that in everything we do, we have to deliver for the people of this country, in every sector in which we have said that we will deliver.
Correct.
Mr. Speaker, corruption affects the quality of institutions. And how does that happen? People do not trust institutions if they know that the person who went in there before them to have business done would have been able to write a check and have that business done. They don't respect the authority of the institution. There are people on the streets of Barbados today who have no faith right now, for example, in the process involved in getting a taxi permit or in getting a ZR permit, because the streets of this country were awash with them 2 weeks before the election. And those people who sought to stick to the rule of law, who sought to stick to process, to take their documentation, to go and stand in a line and to do things the proper way, were left out in the cold.
True.
Corruption erodes people's trust in public institutions and public process. And that, sir, is what this bill seeks to help restore. But I also want to say, sir, that if we are going to talk about transparency and accountability, we have to get transparent about everything. I firmly believe in being transparent about everything. In a past life, I worked as a consultant for agencies like those that employed my colleague, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, who have something to show us about real transparency. Because when you are a consultant, sir, or you are engaged for any reason by those types of institutions, the amount of the contract is fully published and available to the public. So while I was searching for a paper that I had written some time ago, and I was Googling myself, which one should never do, I happened upon the amount of this contract that I had done for this institution, and it was clear for everyone to see my full name, the terms under which I was engaged. There was a link leading to my CV. There was a link leading to the evaluation, the reason why it was considered suitable for the job. These are things that should be matters of public record. Why not? It gives confidence in the notion that we are conducting the business of government in the right way. Transparency of expenditure, what we are spending on, not what we are voting. And then coming back time after time after time, as the last government did, with supplementaries. Not that they are never necessary, but that the job of this Honourable House, when we come to debate estimates, is to bring our best judgment of the true cost of what we are proposing to the people of Barbados. And so, it is possible, Mr. Speaker, sir, to have in real time, available for the people of Barbados, the actual expenditure that the government of Barbados is making, especially in certain key sectors or in certain key pieces of infrastructure or projects that are of great importance to the country, that stand to have great investment value, that stand as a key public good for the people of Barbados, from which people of Barbados can benefit. And so when we talk about having an electronic dashboard sir, it is not just because we want to create a fancy piece of technology. It is because that is one of the important tools of transparency. There is no good reason why most of what we do should not be able to bear the scrutiny of the public of Barbados. And that does not refer, sir, to matters of national security, where the Prime Minister's office will need to maintain certain private information for the protection of our borders.
You only remember has 4 more minutes.
But it says, sir, that we have nothing to hide. It says that we have made a commitment to act in the best interests of the people of Barbados, and that in our day-to-day activities, in where we go, in who we engage, in what we spend and what we spend it on, that we are happy to have the people of Barbados see and reflect and give opinions and give feedback. Because, you know, when you walk in the dark, you open up yourself to a lot of conjecture about what you're doing. But when you walk in full light, there's very little space for people to wonder and ask questions. And so, with those few words, sir, I want simply to restate my full commitment to this bill and my excitement on behalf, certainly, of the people of St. Michael South Central and the people of Barbados, that we are taking the charge at the front to lead this country back towards full, real accountability and transparency. I am obliged to you, sir.
You all remember for Christchurch West?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I guess as customarily as I am trying to do with most of my speeches going forward, I look for an application that is reflective of the matter being discussed from the good book. And the particular verse that really struck me for this particular presentation comes from 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. The honorable member for Christchurch East is trying to suggest that I should be looking at Exodus. But I'm looking today at 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. And it says, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. For by what a man is overcome, by this he is enslaved. And I take this very seriously, Mr. Speaker, because when you place yourself in a position to accept some bribe or some favor by, as the honorable member for St. Joseph says, a corruptor, and you become yourself the corruptee, you are forever enslaved by that person, because that person now has certain information on you and has put you in a place that you are up for sale. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, sometimes as a government minister, you are put in a position to negotiate with companies and corporations. And I speak in particular of what we call a multinational corporation. For instance, in the oil and gas industry. And we have to understand, Mr. Speaker, that some of these oil and gas industries have as their balance sheet numbers greater than the whole gross domestic product of the whole of Barbados. The whole of Barbados. Honorable member, again, is suggesting the whole of the Caribbean. An oil and gas company, when they produce a balance sheet, we produce balance sheets in the millions. They produce balance sheets in the billions, not in the millions. And with an economy that has just $10 billion as its gross domestic product, which means all of the activities and all of the income of all of the people of Barbados put together only equates to $10 billion a year. And when you are put in a position to negotiate with BP or Exxon or some of these companies, which we will have to negotiate because we have bid blocks to negotiate with these companies. These companies, called multinationals, can bring significant influence to bear on people that they negotiate with. And we have to be very, very aware of this. The reason I say this, Mr. Speaker, is because I'm reminded of a particular article I read of what happens in certain African countries, where multinationals move into an African country and literally take over the exploration and the exploitation of that country. And they do this in a place where they can use their influence and use their money to destabilize those countries. It was said in that article that multinationals prefer to operate in a destabilized country because it enables them to be able to operate at the level that they want to operate at easier and more effectively by giving people bribes. So when they operate in a country that is run by law and is completely following the laws as stipulated in that country, they find that they cannot mine the country and they cannot extract the resources of that country in the way that they would like because it is a country ruled by law. So they therefore seek to destabilize the country by producing corrupt politicians and corrupt officials, and by destabilizing the country, they then find that they can extract the resources more effectively, more efficiently, and much more profitably than a country that is run by law. Well, Mr. Speaker, Barbados must show the rest of the world that we are a country of laws, and that we are run by laws. And that if we had corrupt politicians in the past, we are not going to have any corrupt politicians in the future. Because the people of this country spoke loud and clear. And they told us that they had had enough of that type of politics, and they want a new breed of politician and a new politics. And they want a politician that is incorruptible. And I am sure, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation will go a long way to ensure and show the people of this country that the Barbados Labour Party and all of its members are not only talking the talk, but we are walking the walk as well. Because we are making it clear to the people of Barbados that we are not following the same type of politics as obtained in the past. That we are not going down the road that people can get contracts and take money from certain institutions up to, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph said it, $28 million at the Transport Board, and not a contract, not a tender. $2.8 million a year or thereabouts, over 10 years. Not one contract or not one tender. These are things that we have to speak about in this country, because we have to understand where we were in the past and more importantly, to chart our future and chart our path for the way forward in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, this is extremely important and a very historic debate for the people of Barbados. Because for years, the people of Barbados were asking for this type of legislation. And I am so happy to see that we now have not only taken it on board, but we will be putting this into practice. Now, Mr. Speaker, I heard members also speak about what we term garrison constituencies. The Honourable Member for St. Michael West, Leader of the Opposition. And I fully agree with him. I remember, as he said, in 2003, we first saw that emergence of close relationships between questionable characters and people seeking to seek high office in Barbados. It was further strengthened in 2008 and went into 2013. And I call it garrison constituencies. It's very popular in Jamaica, for those of you who know anything about Jamaican politics. But garrison constituencies are well known in Jamaica. It is essentially a particular person with questionable contacts and using his influence in a community or in a district to secure his position in high office. We would remember the Dudus Coke matter. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you would remember that Dudus Coke matter quite well. And eventually resulted, I believe, in the fall of a whole prime minister on that Dudus Coke matter. So this is something that we do not want to see in this country. And I am glad to report that I believe from the results of the last election, that kind of garrison constituency mentality has been stamped out by the people of Barbados. And they sent a strong message to those unsavory characters that this government is not for sale. Because that is the way that we were going. Government for sale. But that has come to an end. And people in this country have to understand that just because you control a dollar does not mean that you can buy an official. Because our officials have to be stronger than that. And I fully support paying our officials properly too, to make sure that they're stronger than that. And this is so important. Because if a particular person sees a man being out there hungry and having a need, he's going to try to fill that need for a favor in return. Mr. Speaker, you would understand the term quid pro quo. Something for something. So we have to be cognizant. We have to be aware. We have to understand that these things happen. But we have to take the legislative action to stamp them out. And to make the penalties right, to make sure that people are not encouraged or enticed or tempted, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South said, to go down the wrong road. And if it means legislation to keep us on the right road, so be it. Now, my biggest concern with legislation, Mr. Speaker, was the concept of people divulging information that we would have submitted. And my concern with that was because, of course, I wouldn't want people out there to know how truly poor I am. As you know, Mr. Speaker, people out there might look at a person's assets, but they have no information as to a person's liabilities. And just because a person may have certain tangible assets, which people can look at and ascribe them to you, they may not have equal information to that person's liabilities, Honourable Speaker. So just to make the House understand that looking at assets is not always the whole picture. And sometimes you also have to look at a person's liabilities. So my concern was, if we put down our assets and put down our liabilities, and you know Barbados is a small country, sooner or later that information would be out in the general public. And it was a valid concern. It's a valid concern that was shared by many former members of Parliament that I would have spoken to over the years, and that was their concern. But I am satisfied that this new legislation and the way it is crafted, and I heard the member for St. Michael West speak about it, about how it would be treated if people divulge that information. And I agree with him that maybe we should be looking not only at who gave out the information, but who enticed that person to receive the information. And it is something that we may want to look at. I am satisfied that it is, as it is written currently, it will be able to protect all of us. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's another aspect tangential to this legislation that the Honorable Attorney General spoke about. And it has to do with the Public Accounts Committee. And why I speak about this is I was not in the Honorable Chamber at the time. But I was horrified and mortified that a government, when under pressure to appear at a Public Accounts Committee hearing and to give evidence to a Public Accounts Committee, rather than do that, table a bill to repeal the said same Public Accounts Committee. And I thought that to be unconscionable. I thought that to be a most egregious act. Because I remember when the Public Accounts Committee was first expanded to include the Senate and other members, not only the other place, not only the members in the House, in the lower house, but also the members of the other place. I remember when that was done. Because we wanted to strengthen the Public Accounts Committee, and we wanted to give the opposition, at the time Barbados Labour Party was the government, and we wanted to give the opposition a chance to get a fully functional and a fully staffed Public Accounts Committee. And that was done by the Barbados Labour Party. So now that the Barbados Labour Party was on the other side, was on the opposition side, and using the Public Accounts Committee to full potential, and using it to call sitting ministers to give account of their ministries and their actions, and the then government could decide that to stop the action and the activity of the Public Accounts Committee, they tabled a bill to repeal the said same committee. Well, what oversight would there be of a government if the Public Accounts Committee is repealed? That was terrible. And I want to go further. I want to suggest that the Public Accounts Committee should be enshrined in the Constitution. That you couldn't come and repeal a Public Accounts Committee just because you had a simple majority. You should be required to have a constitutional majority, not just a simple majority. And I don't believe that is now the case. If I am incorrect, please correct me. But certainly it was tabled, and I do not think that that was correct. Mr. Speaker, I also heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael West speak about the fact that the Leader of the Opposition had to be consulted with respect to clergy and members of the clergy. And he did say that he didn't think that it was right that the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition had the final say because there was the associations of churches and the Christians associations and so on. And I take the point. But remember, Mr. Speaker, we are not only a Christian society. We also have many members of our society that are Muslim. Many members of our society that are Hindu. Many members of our society that are Sikh. many members of our society that may be agnostic. So even although we may have a large percentage that are Christian, it is not the whole society. And I take the point that it may be a large percentage, but the members and elected officials must remember that they do not represent a segment. You represent the whole country. And if you represent the whole country, you must take into account other dissenting views as well. So I understand why it allows the input of the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, and not only the input of the Conference of Churches. I give way.
In the House a bit on this matter. I did suggest that that person is to be drawn from the clerical community. And I did go on to say, for example, in the church community, there is a BEA and the BXC. But I was focusing on the clerical community and suggesting that those associations should be consulted rather than the opposition leader and the Prime Minister.
Noted, honourable member.
Thank you very much. And I heard very clearly the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, but that does not moot the point. Because even although they're from the clerical community, Muslim leaders of a congregation would say that they are clerics too. And they too are part of the clerical community. Right, so therefore it must belabor the point that they too would have to have a voice in this country. So it would not only be the Council of Churches, it will not only be the council, but for everybody, for all spirit-based and spiritual-based organizations should have some view and some input on the matter. And if they have to have some input through the Prime Minister and through the opposition, so be it. So, Mr. Speaker and honourable members, I also heard the member for St. Michael South Central. And I heard her say quite clearly that she walked away from a very lucrative salary in order to give service to her country. And I have to fully agree with her, as I understand the sentiment that she is experiencing. I understand the sentiment that she is experiencing, and I understand that she has had to change, she would have had to or will have to change her lifestyle to now match her income. But I understand and I want to fully support and I agree that service to your country must far outweigh a lucrative salary at the end of the month. And I want to share her views because I guess people would be considering that I too would have walked away from a lucrative salary. But I feel that I have a debt to Barbados to pay. Because if it was not for the people of Barbados, I would not have had the opportunity to get the training that I got. And if it was not for the people of Barbados coming to me as patients, I would not have been able to build any kind of wealth that I may have. So it is the people of Barbados to whom I am indebted to. And if I have an opportunity to serve those people to the best of my ability and to pay back for so much that they have given me, I have to do that. Because if good men do not come forward and do what they have to do, then you know what will happen. Because we saw what happened with the last administration. And we have come to make wrong things right. And I know, Mr. Speaker, with every bit of strength in my body. I work every day, to take the ministry that which I have been entrusted forward just 1 inch. And I thank you all. I thank the people of Barbados for having that trust and that faith in me. And I look forward to continuing to work for the benefit of this country each and every day. I'm obliged.
The honourable member for St. Philip North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I felt that I am probably the member in this House that has the greatest responsibility to speak on this bill. Since a large crowd hangs over St. Philip North, because one of them being alleged in this corruption has been a Philippine forever, a son of our St. Philip soil, and I think it would be remiss of me not to stand here and say something for the people of St. Philip North. I mean, it is true, well, this is true that a large cloud hangs over St. Philip North. That is not to say the showers are isolated. The rest of Barbados also felt them. And I stand in agreement and support of the bill being presented here today. Mr. Speaker, how do we justify to our peoples, especially the people of St. Philip North? The honourable member for St. Joseph said he had the worst transport system, but I beg to differ, as we all are different, by the way. But how do I justify that to my people who have to travel from the country? Most people know that work is in town. Many of us go to school in town. Everything happens in town. And we can't get there because of the dismal transport system. When we watch our heroes, so to put it, people that we look up to, driving around in luxury vehicles, and we can say nothing and feel a sense of hopelessness with respect to people accounting for what we are seeing going on. How do I justify to a school, which I have many in St. Philip North, that they leave because of one school bus at 3 o'clock? There is a paucity of extracurricular activities. Many schools up there don't have 4-H clubs, brownies, Cub Scouts. And Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, I was speaking to a teacher for one of the schools who noted that because of this lack of experience in life, lack of clubs, lack of being able to contribute, to participate in these clubs, composition skills, for example, are suffering. If people don't know it, they can't write about it. And how do I explain the monies being spent in the transport board when our children are suffering? I cannot. People have had to give up jobs because they can't get to work. People have been sent home because they can't get to work. And yet the salaries, although some of us, the Speaker for Christchurch West,
Honourable member for Christchurch.
the honourable member for Christchurch West might understand, I guess, that he's well endowed monetarily. I am not. My liabilities far exceed my income, and I relate to many people in our society who suffer the same fate and watch politicians live in luxury. While we drive around vehicles, walk or catch bus, there are politicians, because that's now a bad word in our society, thanks to what has gone before us. I am one of those who suffer, like some of us in here. How do I justify that to my people when every area of daily living is being affected by this so-called alleged corruption? How do I explain, Mr. Speaker, the money spent in the transport board for consultants when I know for a fact that we have many skilled mechanics in the transport board that probably could have done the same job? How do I explain parts being brought in when we can't get a bus on the road? How do I explain, Mr. Speaker, I cannot leave here today without mentioning one of my patients who is still owed, or should I say was, I'll tell you why, still owed by government for jobs done for the transport board. I had the privilege of walking him through sickness, and I had the privilege of also walking him through death 2 weeks ago, and he has not been paid up to this day. I would take it that the powers that be would see to it that at least his family gets what's owed. He had to shut down his business. These are things that are happening here, and I don't see why somebody should brush across this bill, brush it aside. I don't understand why the last administration did not see to it. I did not understand, well, I do understand why they did not stand up to the Public Accounts Committee. That was gross disrespect. The committee is there for a reason, and I think it needs to be respected. And in the future, going forward, we cannot allow things like this to happen. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Philip North, most of us, including you, sir, I believe, pass through parish land in St. Philip, river land in St. Philip, and have the displeasure of seeing the unfinished houses that were there for a decade, maybe. Some of them, before elections, about 5 of them were filled in parish land, but many of them are empty. I have had people from the day after elections coming to me, people who have applied to the National Housing Corporation for homes. One lady, her house was burnt down several years ago, and she's still awaiting. It seems like a case of I apply and I am denied housing. Well, those houses sit there empty, sheep and graze in the yard, and that's about it. We can do better than this. How do I explain to these people when we drive through St. Philip North and beyond every day and see the luxury homes going up, still increasing in size like they'll never end? How do I explain to people like that who have families with 5 children and renting a room from a neighbor after having applied for a house and yet to see it happen? This is the kind of thing that we are making this bill. We are seeing to it that this bill is passed. We have, well, everybody so far spoke about the Grotto and the Valerie and the Exmouth with over $30 million unaccounted for these low-income homes, quote unquote. We have $30 million plus outstanding. Nobody knows where it is. When we have schools, as I said before, suffering. People are suffering for housing. The healthcare system has taken a beating. When I was working for government many years ago, I was one of the doctors that did home outreach, where we managed to reach the shut-ins that could not get to the polyclinics. We managed to reach the new young mothers that had babies for the first time and hadn't a clue how to take care of them. Many of these programs were cut short, or not given the staffing that they deserve because no monies, no funding. When people, $30 million could do a lot. And I know it's more than $30 million. It's our people that are suffering. We heard before elections that there was money. How much was it? $50 million allocated for roads and debushing? Thanks to some of my constituents, and I think ministers here, the bushing is now taking place. But what do I say? Because people in Barbados, despite the belief that we have short memories, we don't. And people are still remembering that money. I am still remembering money allocated for debushing and nothing was done. When that money could have been put for that project, give people work. A gentleman called me that was part of a small debushing earlier up a few years ago, and he has not been paid up to now. He's not a supporter of mine, but I have to mention him here because he will be shortly. Mr. Speaker, this is basically blatant corruption, and it is a source of frustration for our people. It is a source of frustration for everyone in here, for my family, for everybody in St. Philip North. I see heads shaking, but it is true. Many of us have dropped in socioeconomic class, those of us who have managed not to drop below the poverty line, while we see others flourishing. This cannot be fair. I support the bill, Mr. Speaker. The truth is I felt a little uneasy as the honorable member for the opposition was saying that the numbers are too little, $20,000 and 5 years in prison. But then I'm told by honorable member for St. Joseph that those numbers will be going back up to 200,000. Yes, so I am grateful for that, because I think the crime, the punishment should fit the crime. We have people going to prison for less in this country. We have people going into supermarkets stealing a little bit to feed their families. Not that I'm saying is right, but they spend some time in prison. Many lawyers in here, you know what I'm talking about, and people are walking away with allegedly walking away with millions of dollars and not spending a day. it's not necessarily that we want to see people go to prison, not necessarily. What we want is the people to answer for it. I think Barbadian public would be satisfied to some extent if people just come forward and answer to these charges. I like the whistleblower protection, as whistleblowing is the #1 method for finding fraud worldwide, probably. It encourages people to come forward without fear of victimization. At this point, I cannot help but mention here that yes, a lot of it is monetary. There's a lot of bribing. And perhaps this is for another bill. I know one was recently passed, but I have to say here, bribing is, at least in my constituency, is not all about money. I have to put in a plug for the women of Barbados because I see it every day. Of course, I am bound by patient-client confidentiality, but I'm meeting a lot of women here that have had to give up what I consider more than money to get homes, and I think something needs to be done about this. Of course, the problem is people coming forward and speaking, but I think apart from the sexual harassment bill, I think this is more than that, and it needs to be addressed for our women. This is the vulnerable group. When there's nothing worse than taking advantage of a female who has children and no other support, who needs a home and is suffering in somebody else's little room in the back, paying $700 a month, when something could be done about it. No woman should have to get to her knees, no pun intended, to get a home, or anything else for that matter. The declaration of gifts more than $1,000, I applaud that and I support it. You know, I see come into Parliament every week as coming into battle. A battle where we fight for our constituents and we represent them. Unlike the last administration, this would be a battle without spoils. This is what we are giving back to the people of Barbados who have given so much to us, the country who has given so much to us. And it has to be that we will fight without expecting, apart from the usual monthly salary, without expecting more in return than what we should get. And I appreciate that clause in there with declaration of gifts for more than $1,000. The people of Barbados really and truly have all but lost faith in the so-called politician. We need to rewrite the definition. I remember in my nomination, I looked up the definition of politician in the dictionary and it will frighten you. The definition has changed and we need to change it back. The onus is on us really to regain the faith of the public, of the constituents of this country. The onus is on us. And I don't know the law well, but even if we are unable to go back and prosecute, we need to go forward and make it right. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my voice to this debate, fully in support, as will become, the reason for which will become apparent very shortly. And I, like my good friend from Christchurch West, like to bring relation back to the text of the good book. And he would have quoted rather eloquently from Peter, but that was a long, flowery, poetic text, the gist of which I remember, but the wording of which I've forgotten. I prefer to keep it simple. Exodus 20, verse 15, that's the law of Moses, given by God to rule the people of Israel and the world. Simple. Exodus 20, verse 15. Thou shalt not steal. Mr. Speaker, Barbados is largely unrecognizable from what it was 10 years ago. 10, 11 years ago, Mr. Speaker, Barbadians were full of hope. We had just had the World Cup, Cricket World Cup in Barbados. Money was flowing in Barbados. People built onto their houses in anticipation of the World Cup and beyond. Little Barbados pulled off the third largest sporting event in the world, behind the Olympics and behind the Football World Cup. Barbados, we did it, and we did it well. Anybody in Barbados in 2007, or everybody in Barbados believed there was nothing we could not do. We were on the brink of something great. If you drove around Barbados in 2007, a lot of people have fixed up their houses. They had painted up their houses. Barbados was looking pretty. The bush was cut. Garbage was off the streets. There was no sewage on the street yet. It was going well, money in the bank. Mr. Speaker, take that snapshot and then put that one side and look at today's snapshot. Everything has gone wrong and is going wrong at the same time. It is not bad luck. If it is bad luck, then that's on the footing of a biblical curse. It's not bad luck. It is mismanagement, and it is corruption. Nothing in Barbados gets done without somebody who is being paid a job to do it, looking for something extra on top of what they're being paid. In a lot of departments in government, the systemic delays didn't evolve, they were created. We've created delays in every possible avenue of government where a delay can be created, so that people have no choice but to pay or compromise themselves to bypass that delay. Government is supposed to deliver for the people of a country what it pledges to do. If you are the Ministry of Transport and Works, you are to deliver a proper transport and works system. If you are the Ministry of Health, you are supposed to deliver an adequate and efficient healthcare system. If you're the person responsible for granting licenses, then you process the application and you grant the license. If you're responsible for giving tax refunds, then you assess the application, and if warranted, you give the refund. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it worked before. All of a sudden, nothing in Barbados is working. Long lines are the order of the day. Frustration is the order of the day. When those things happen, corruption will flourish because people don't have time. Time is money. The man with a lot of money will bypass those delays for $1. And he's going to bypass it here, and he's going to bypass it everywhere. So then what happens is the person who took the money to allow him to bypass now says to the small man who can't afford it, well, you know, there's a way to get your tax refund processed quicker. There's a way to get your town country planning approval. There's a way for you to get a ZR permit or taxi license. And then, or your goods out of the port. And then it goes on till there's no longer a suggestion that there's a way. There's an expectation now that that way is to be sought and paid for. That's where we've come in Barbados. I will tell you what drove it home for me now, how far we've slid and how far necessity has taken us in our country. When I come from my constituency in Christchurch East, I tend to drive along the South Coast. I used to avoid it for so long that I now take every opportunity to drive on the good, dry, clean-smelling South Coast roads. And I drive the whole way down Highway 7, cross by the Garrison. I turn Gemmet's Road, go up by the hospital. Mr. Speaker, prostitution always exists in Barbados, we know it. You turn a blind eye to it. Prostitution was localized in Barbados. Prostitution in Barbados existed in Nelson Street, and it existed out there by the Turf Club, by the Garrison in Bush Hill. Everybody in Barbados knew it. You had to go to seek it out, because you wouldn't butt it by accident. Very few people actually, as a matter of course, turn and go down Bush Hill. There are many ways to avoid Bush Hill. If you wanted it, you knew where to find it. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not the case anymore. If you drive, Mr. Speaker, down Highway 7, and you drive across by the yacht club, and you drive across by government headquarters, and you turn and go across by the hospital, I would say littered along the way are the signs of prostitution. And it is not even discreet. 2 nights ago, on the main road going by the hospital, out by Delaware, I passed a lady standing on the sidewalk in a panty and nothing else. Nothing else, Mr. Speaker. Now, this is actually serious, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually not saying this anecdotally. I am saying this because it says something. It says this is where we have now come as a country. The fact that as of necessity somebody does that is bad enough. The fact that it is now accepted as commonplace has shown where we have slipped from and where we have fallen to. It is all systemic, Mr. Speaker. So, it doesn't exist alone. With that level of, I would say, decay, hand in hand, the corruption has risen. Now, we know about it. We speak about it. We hear about it. Everybody knows it exists, but what are we doing about it? I can forgive a small man who tries to get a competitive advantage. I can't forgive somebody who's taken an oath and sworn to uphold the laws of our country and to govern our country properly. I can't forgive them. When you use your position in government, Mr. Speaker, whether it be from this parliament or from a cabinet or as a senior official in government, when you use your position to secure an advantage for yourself over and above what you are entitled to at the expense of taxpayers and citizens of Barbados, then you have done wrong. There is a belief in Barbados that nobody is ever going to go to jail for this. All politicians are the same. All politicians are the same. Mr. Speaker, every time somebody says that, I cringe. Because I remember, Mr. Speaker, as I sought to rid the good people of Christchurch East of the scourge that occupied that seat before, I cringe when somebody says we are all the same. We are not the same. I am nothing like him, Mr. Speaker. Our government, this government, is nothing like the last government. Mr. Speaker, you are not like the last speaker. And we now have to put our money where our mouth is. I was heartened when the Honorable Prime Minister, the now Honorable Prime Minister, the member for St. Michael Northeast, when she said, let us do this before getting the government, let us show the people we are serious, let us draft this. I was excited until she turned to me. But you know how it is, Mr. Speaker. I accepted that, and a committee was set up to draft it. And I want, with your permission, to call the members of that committee, the names of the members of that committee, Mr. Speaker, because the committee wasn't paid, and the committee met. It is no easy feat drafting legislation. It met, it drafted, it met again, it drafted, it put it out there for comment and then took those comments on board and drafted some more. And I would like, in that respect, Mr. Speaker, to recognize Sir David Simmons, to recognize Mr. Leslie Haynes, QC, to recognize Mr. Stuart Motley, to recognize the Honorable Attorney General and the member for St. Joseph, to recognize the member for St. James North, for those who don't know, Mr. Edmund Hinkson, and for Christchurch South, Mr. Ralph Thorne. Sorry, all those are QCs, sir, forgive me. And I throw myself in there at the end. But, Mr. Speaker, and I take this opportunity now to segue to address something that was raised by the leader of the opposition, and his concern is a valid one. We drafted and put it out, and went out there to the people of Barbados saying, when we get in, this is what we propose to pass. These are the fines and these are the penalties. I understand the concerns of the leader of the opposition.
Honorable.
The honorable leader of the opposition. No disrespect, mate. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General did not touch it back because I guess for his own reasons, he did not want to give the explanation as to what happened, but I am not bound by the same things that bind him. When we were commissioned to draft this legislation, our instructions were simple from the now Prime Minister of Barbados. Her instructions to our committee was to make the bill tight, that nobody can wriggle out. No ambiguity, make it tight. Make the powers of the commission wide. Allow them to do whatever they need to do to find, trace, and punish corruption wherever it is found in public offices. Make the powers of the commission wide. And the last one, the third one, was make the penalties painful. That was her instruction, make the penalties painful. When we drafted, sir, when we drafted, the penalties we put in there were higher than anything existing in our current legislation to penalize any offenses. The penalties were higher than any other penalties found for similar legislation in the Caribbean. We put in the hardest and highest. It went to the Chief Parliamentary Council to be drafted. Every legislation has to pass through the CPC. Normally they would draft it, but we drafted in opposition. It was sent to them when we were in government for them to stamp it and approve it and put it through the proper channels before you. So those fines were changed by the CPC without reference to the committee or to the Attorney General. So they came back in here, it was laid before we caught ourselves. And the mistake was then discovered. And the reason, as I understand it, why they were changed, is the CPC said, well, legislation has to be harmonious. Fines must bear some sort of relation to other offenses. So in the rest of the laws in Barbados, there were no fines like this for any comparable criminal offense. So those fines were adjusted down by the CPC to bring it in line with what existed in the legislation of Barbados, because otherwise you then have a problem. If I'm convicted of something under this act, I can go back to court or appeal on the grounds that the fines here are disproportionate, that they're much harsher than anything else that exists in the law. And Mr. Speaker, sir, as perhaps one of the most known criminal lawyers in Barbados, you would see that immediately as a ground for appeal if one of your clients was found guilty of it. But our position was this when we drafted it: we don't care. Let the people feel the wrath and let them appeal, and we will deal with it then. But we need to show we are serious. The CPC, being the good officer she is, and doing her job, sought to bring them down and harmonize them with what existed in the legislation. It is as simple as that. It is not that we back down from it. When we caught that mistake, we had two options: pull the legislation back out of Parliament and give instructions, or deal with it once it came up in select committee. We did not wish to waste any further time with getting this legislation through the necessary steps in this House. And it was determined that we would deal with it in select committee, which is why the Honorable Attorney General this morning said, well, although it looks as if the fines are lower, do not worry about that, we are going to sort it out. And, Mr. Speaker, I know what went into that and why they were put there. I have been given the assurance from the Honorable Attorney General, and I believe him, because I did not waste my good time. And the member for St. James North and Christchurch South, we did not waste our good time doing what we did to fulfill our mandate and our promise and the directive of the now Prime Minister of Barbados for something to slip. So I wish through you, Mr. Speaker, to assure the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and any other Barbadian who is concerned there was no subterfuge, there was no deception. The law will go back to what it was when it was drafted. The heavy fines will stay in, and those who run afoul of this legislation will be prosecuted as intended to the fullest extent of the law. That is our promise. So, the Honorable Attorney General did not wish to stand up in here and say that changes were made without consultation with us, but I have no qualms about saying it, and that is what it was. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and everybody else who had a concern, their souls are now at peace. Because at the end of the day, we have to send a message. But we then have the other side of the coin. We then have people who say, but this is unfair, that it is asking too much of public servants. It is asking too much of public officials. You're going to get people shying away from public office. And I say, why? Why? Everything in this legislation makes sense. If we look at it from the top to the bottom in a nutshell, the Integrity Commission is an autonomous body. It needs to be an autonomous body because we may have to investigate the Commissioner of Police. I am not saying that he's on the cards, right? And my point is simply this. The body that normally investigates crimes in Barbados is the police force. But what if you had a situation where you had to investigate high-ranking members of the force? That is why the Integrity Commission is an autonomous body with wide powers. Wide powers, it can designate investigators, special investigators. These investigators have effectively the same powers as the police. They can go and get a warrant, they can enter premises, they can arrest people, they can search and seize. This is necessary for this legislation to have the teeth that is intended. With respect to the declaration of assets that most everybody is concerned about, the aim is not to penalize or embarrass you. If you come into Parliament and you don't have a lot of money, that is okay. That is okay. You came to serve. You're not going to be embarrassed. It's not going to be out there. It's going to be sealed unless you become the subject of an investigation, at which point your statement will be examined and used as a reference point. This is where you were then. Explain how you are where you are now. Equally, for those more affluent members of the chamber, I won't point any fingers at anybody because I don't know anybody's wealth or debt or financial standing. But anybody who's now come into office, who has money or who has property or who has investments, that's nothing to be ashamed of. You work hard. If you have them honestly, you have nothing to be worried about. Any person standing on a statutory board or sitting on a statutory board, you have nothing to worry about. The question comes, or the issue comes, if after being in a position of power and authority, you cannot explain how you got from point A to point B, then you have a problem. That is the reason for the declaration of assets. It is not meant to embarrass anybody. It is not meant to make anybody uncomfortable. There's nothing that should frighten anybody who is coming into politics or coming into public service and their heart is good and pure and true and they intend to do the work of the people and do the work of the people honestly. There is nothing to fear from this legislation. in other countries, sir, and I hope, as the Honorable Leader of the Opposition said, I hope this is the start of a suite of legislation. Because for this to make sense, other pieces have to come. The freedom of information. When I sign something, I have a nice new letterhead. I was writing a letter the other day with Wilfred Abrams at the top, and my personal assistant took it away and tore it up. Mr. Abrams, this is not your letterhead anymore. This is your letterhead. When I sign in my capacity as MP or minister, or when somebody signs as a chairman of a statutory board, you're not doing it in your own name. You're doing it in the name of the people of Barbados. So those same people have a right to know or to be able to access information on every single thing you assign on their behalf. There are no secrets in government. If I borrow from my ministry $10 million, I must be able to explain what it is being used for, and when the project is done, where it went, and if anything is left over, where it went to. We can't have a situation like what happened in Cahill. I don't even think that this current government has yet seen the actual signed contracts for Cahill. How could it be? How could it be, Mr. Speaker, that 4 ministers of government signed binding the people of Barbados to a multi-$100 million deal? A big deal. $700 million. And we can't tell you what is involved. We know the current government of Barbados still trying to find out what are the details of that. How can that be so? That cannot be allowed to They did not sign in their own names. I know who signed. We all know who signed. They didn't sign in their own names. They signed as agents, servants, and or agents of the people and government of Barbados. They are responsible for any commitment that we entered into. They're responsible for any profit we make and any loss we incur as a result of their entering into these contracts. So yes, I agree with the Honorable Leader of the Opposition that there must be a freedom of information suite of legislation coming soon. But further, Mr. Speaker, there's something very self-explanatory called an Explanation of Wealth Act. We don't have it in Barbados yet, but you must be able to account for what you have. I don't begrudge the honorable member for the city. If the honorable member for the city has 4 houses and 3 cars, and he can tell you where these 4 houses and 3 cars came from, and he can show you the winning lotto ticket, then you know that these houses and cars were purchased through legitimate means. If he came into government and he has shares in banks and he got shares in Fortress and his grandmother left him property somewhere that is rented out, and he can show that although he was in government, this is the money that I earned through my declared assets, then nobody can raise a finger if your wealth increases or your circumstance increases. It is where, Mr. Speaker, you come into government riddled with debt when you were bouncing your checks in a gas station before getting into government. It is where, Mr. Speaker, you were evicted from your constituency office because you couldn't pay the rent before you got into government. It is where, Mr. Speaker, your water and your electricity was cut off in your constituency office and your car was repossessed before you got into government. It is where those things which they're not conclusive, but they're indicators that you're in difficulty. Those are sure indicators that your expenses are greatly surpassing your assets. Because as the good member for Christchurch West would have alluded, assets are tangible and visible. Debts, for the most part, are invisible. They only become visible when they seize the assets because they can't pay. But when you go from there, Mr. Speaker, to driving a BMW X5. And you don't even have one car, you have two. You have a BMW X5 and a Suzuki Vitara. That's where you go from struggling to living in a big house. Right? That's where you go from scrambling and ducking from the marshals and from the creditors to spending widely, buying drinks for everybody, having lavish Christmas parties and the most hampers in the world. That's when you go to that point. Then you got to explain your wealth. It is real simple. When people are caught at the airport, or if the police go and raid your house, Mr. Speaker, a common man, if the police go and raid your house and they find $10,000 on the mattress.
You won't find that in my house, though. I don't remember. I don't have it.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, if they raid your house and they find $100,000 on the mattress.
I can find it either, Mr. Speaker.
Then the
Can't
point
find it.
is,
I don't remember. Can't find it.
the point
But
is,
they don't
Mr.
have
Speaker,
it.
there's
I don't remember.
I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. Then the presumption is that you must be able to explain where that money came from. Because if you have $100,000 on your mattress or in your safe, and you cannot tell us where it came from, that somebody paid you fees, that your mother died and left it for you, and you can't account for it, then the presumption is that you got it illegally.
Do I remember? Has 2 more minutes.
Oh, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware the last time you notified somebody at 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker, you caught me off guard.
I apologize for that. But
So, Mr. Speaker, just in wrapping up very quickly, the point simply is, people need not be afraid of this piece of legislation. This piece of legislation is intended to catch, investigate, and punish corrupt officials, corrupt politicians, corrupt public servants. Honest people who are taking their salary and living their life normally have nothing to fear by this legislation. I also applaud the whistleblower protection, because the reality is the only way you're going to be able to investigate crimes, especially crimes in government where power is abused, is if some of the people who were abused step forward and say it happened to me. Or where you have an employer, an employee who knows that their employer is involved in corrupt practices, then you need their evidence. So the whistleblower legislation allows people to give that evidence without fear of being victimized and protects them once they have given that evidence. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that I agree with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition on is that we need to get our justice system up and running quickly. Because with the best legislation in the world and the courts are in shambles, then we're going to have a problem. So I applaud the efforts of the Attorney General in trying to get us back on track. But it is a notable deficiency. It was not occasioned by this government. We came and found it, but steps are being taken to address it as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, I believe that the same laws that apply to the small man must apply to the big man. Because we must walk around in Barbados confident and comfortable that the same rules apply to everybody. Justice for me is the same as justice for you. The law is not interpreted differently for you than it is for me, or for the man in Silver Sands, or for the man in Parish Land. So I am firmly joining those who believe that it is high time that somebody big get locked up.
to the honourable member, please wind up.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe witch hunt. I believe use the powers in this legislation, use the powers of the police force, use all available lawful means to try to find the missing money of Barbados. Try to find all those funds that went awry for which we cannot account, and trace those funds where people have assets that they can't explain. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not pointing my finger at anybody that I want to be targeted. If they ask me, I can point them to a few. But my point simply, Mr. Speaker, is follow the law, apply the law, enforce the law, and if it falls that a politician or a big up in business or a public official has offended, then they must get investigated, tried, convicted, and locked up in the same way as a small man. The law is for all, Mr. Speaker. I completely support this legislation. I thank you.
The honourable member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to join this debate feeling extremely pleased, Mr. Speaker, with what is being done in the name of Barbadians with this piece of legislation. I want to express my sincere appreciation for the presentation that was made by the Attorney General, giving to Barbadians the assurance that something will be done about those who seek to corrupt and pollute our nation and rob our nation and its people of the resources. I also want to applaud the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for the issues that he raised in stating before the Honourable House that this could only be a beginning. That if Barbados is to take seriously its democracy, if we are to take seriously our quality of life, if we are to stand and take responsibility for the quality of nation, the quality of society which we design, then more legislation must come to support this first step, that we can ensure that the nation and its resources are properly guarded, so that each Barbadian can have the assurance in his or her heart that they've come to a nation that is well ordered, well managed, that they can have a hope for a future because the road has been leveled, that they can have the hope of access to the opportunities and the resources which abound in the country, because fairness exists in the way in which those are managed, that our senior citizens can look forward to a comfortable life, can look forward to a retirement and an end of life in which they're not struggling to put food or medication in their mouth, because the public resources are properly managed and what has been promised is delivered to them, that they can look forward to that quality of life. This is why I'm very happy today, Mr. Speaker, and I have no doubt that you yourself are happy to see this piece of legislation here. And the further assurance that those who have perpetrated ill against this nation and have done grave injustice to the high office that they've held, that they will be held accountable. So this evening, I'm happy, I'm pleased. When we talk about the power of integrity and the price of corruption, it is important for every single Barbadian to understand that this cannot and must not be treated as some disease that lays a hold of people in political life, but rather this is a threat to their very well-being, and therefore they must care about it. They must not accept as normal, they must not accept as usual, that they will all do it, that this is the norm. For when citizens send forth that signal, then there is more and more relaxing of the social values of integrity guarding every aspect of economic and social life. When I watch the news, Mr. Speaker, and I see the distress, the breakdown in societies across the world brought about by corruption and oppression. Sometimes when you watch it, Mr. Speaker, you feel that it's something distant and it's far away and that it would never touch us. But watching the news and constantly analyzing what is going on in countries across the world, you recognize that any time you allow corruption to take root, you make it the norm of the day, it does not stay there. It grows bigger and bigger like a huge cancer until it destroys that society, makes it ungovernable, and makes the place unlivable. And that is why every citizen must care about this piece of legislation and must be vigilant in ensuring that this is not only implemented, but ensuring that it is properly exercised so that it does the job which it has been designed to do. For when economic and social injustice occurs because there's corruption in the civil system, there's corruption in the political system, the things around you begin to deteriorate. Small people with dreams to establish a business, to go after something that's in their heart, to pursue their potential, find that every door is blocked, every obstacle is in the way, because the system is readjusted to allow only a few who are able to pay, who are able to do favors, to get by, to grab the opportunities, to get the contracts, and they are shut out as though they're strangers in their own land. That must not be the case for Barbados. And that will not be the case for Barbados as long as the Barbados Labour Party does what it has pledged to do to protect this society and ensure a better life for all. That is why we have come to office. That is why we've given ourselves in service. When you have this problem of corruption, and I think, Mr. Speaker, it comes because people don't understand the absolute importance of integrity. I remember as a little girl, my mom teaching me the do's and don'ts of life. And my mom was an excellent mother, and she tried to make sure that we lived by certain values. So she shared values on honesty. She shared values of keeping your word, of doing your best and those things. But one of the things that you used to hear a lot as a child is that if you steal or if you do wrong or you do bad, you're not going to go to heaven, God will be mad. And so many children grew up with that notion that the only reason for being honest and the only reason for living in a particular way was so God would not be mad with you and you will get to go to heaven. Well, as time passed, as you grew older and as you understood what a society is about, you learned that that really, strictly speaking, was not the truth. That was not the purpose for integrity. Because integrity is not a passport for heaven. Integrity was designed to make life on earth possible. That without integrity in your systems, social and economic life is impossible. If I go to a pharmacy, Mr. Speaker, and I present my prescription, and I am given medication to take care of a particular health problem, but the persons who manufactured that medication did not act with integrity towards their profession, did not act with integrity towards their promise, did not act with integrity towards the advertisement that they put out on their product, and they caused that medication not to have the desired effect because they were cutting corners to make money, they have now jeopardized my life. It makes living impossible when you do not have integrity underneath all of your systems. If I purchase a car, I do not have the luxury of checking the qualifications of the technician who put it together. I do not have the luxury of making sure that it passed all of its inspections and that the claims that have been made by the engineers and the technicians will hold up. When I purchase that car and I sit in there and I swing that engine, I expect everything in there to be where it ought to be, that they have acted with integrity towards the construction of that car. Without integrity, human life is impossible. And that is why it has to be guarded. That is why it must be guarded by everyone. That is why, whether you are king, whether you are prime minister, whether you are a civil servant, whether you are the postman, whether you are the agriculturalist, whether you are the teacher or the nurse, integrity must permeate everything that you do so that our human life is possible. And therefore, it is a quality we must commend to everyone in our society. And where it is breaking down, a society has a responsibility to repair the breach. Because if that breach is not mended, it will cause a collapse at the point where the breach has been made. And a huge breach has been made in the trust of the people of Barbados in relation to its political actors and to political life. And this generation of the Barbados Labour Party has the responsibility, has the call to purpose to repair this breach. This is the work of our time. And part of our job is the restoration of the public trust in its political system, in its economic system, and in its social system. And we must not fail the people at this point. And therefore, I highly commend this piece of legislation and highly commend the men. I did not hear any women. No women. That is a severe breach, Mr. Speaker. However, we commend the men who sat on that committee and drafted this piece of legislation. And it is my hope that as it goes to select committee, its business will be done with swift dispatch, and that it will be passed and gazetted, and Barbadians will have the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to see a piece of legislation that has the power to transform the economic and social platforms in this country. One of the reasons why I was very pleased with our decision to draft the legislation even before we were in office and to make it a piece of early business for this Parliament is because every day in my constituency I see the impact of corruption on the social and economic system. I had the heartbreaking experience, Mr. Speaker, where a young man sat in front of me, two of them actually, and they were sharing with me how desperately they needed a job. And they shared what their skills were. And they said, I need it urgently. They said because they were living on the street. And I said to the young man, I said, but don't you have relatives? What about your parents? He said, ma'am, I could go home and live at my parents' if I wanted to, because there is a space there for me. But my girlfriend does not have anywhere to live. There is no room in her former household to house her. How would it look that I get up and go home because things have come bad with us and we've been put out of the house we were renting, and I leave her on the street? He said, Miss, I could not do that. So I stay on the street with her. But I'm asking you, I am pleading with you, I need a job, and I need a job quickly, so that I can do something about her condition, so I can take her from off the street. I was moved, Mr. Speaker. And as I pondered on those two young men who sat and told me similar stories, I said to myself, how did Barbados get to a place where so many people do not have homes and are on the street. They may be hidden from the eyes of the regular public, but the people in the communities, in the surrounding areas, the neighbors know what is happening and what is going on, Mr. Speaker. And when I listen to the skills of those young men, one in particular had good construction skills. And I said to myself, that young man would not be on the street if our construction industry had not been made subject to the worst acts of corruption this country has ever seen. He would have a job. He would be working as a mason. He'd be making good money every week. He'd be going to the supermarket. He'd be paying his child support. He'd be able to pay his rent. He would not be on the street with his girlfriend, unable to provide for her, not knowing which corner to look at, where to go to get relief for her. Anytime you allow imbalances, injustices, corruption in your economic and social system, there are people who have to pay the price, and it's generally not the person who created the corruption in the first place. That is why this legislation is important. That is why the penalties are important. That's why the jail terms are important, Mr. Speaker. And if those of us in high office have to pay the small price of putting our assets in an envelope and handing it over to someone to put in safekeeping, should our affairs come into question, we will do it. Because it is the right thing to do. Because it will help us to keep a political system that is clean. No, there's an issue, Mr. Speaker, that we have to consider, that we have to think about. Barbados is a small nation, and that creates a number of problems that you would not necessarily get in a large population where people don't know each other. When you have a small population and everybody knows everybody and everybody is related to everybody and everybody went to school with everybody, this becomes a problem when you have to exercise justice. So one of the things I am praying for is that when we appoint the commissioners to the Integrity Commission, that we search diligently for commissioners for whom Barbados is first. People who understand the importance of the rule of law and the certainty that there must be in law and the application of that law to ensure that there is not a breakdown in the society. That we have and seek out persons of courage, because sometimes you have to stand up and be counted, and you must stand up and be counted when it matters most. So they must have the fortitude of spirit that they can call a spade a spade, that they can be consistent in the application of justice, that when something needs to go to the DPP, it goes, so that we give life to this piece of legislation so that it will do this country good. That is what must happen, Mr. Speaker. If we are to restore confidence, and if we're going to take our democracy seriously, I want to urge that we seek those commissioners who will do the necessary job for Barbados and be guardians of this nation. But there's another piece that is needed. We've heard the need for additional legislation. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to put it to you that the safeguarding of our nation and our resources, the leveling of our playing field, the free access by all to opportunity and resources, that battle will not be properly won or properly completed unless citizens engage in their own democracy. And what do I mean by that, Mr. Speaker? Citizens have to be watchdogs. They have to be firm craftsmen of their own fate. Citizens have to speak loudly when things go awry. They have to demonstrate to the powers that be that we will not tolerate certain behavior. Now, on May 24th, as my honorable colleague, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's South, said earlier, that it is really important that we, as a people, pay attention to all that is happening in our name. He said that on May 24th, Barbadians spoke with a loud voice that the type of governance they had been subjected to over the past 10 years was not acceptable to them, and they were sending a massive signal. I believe that that signal is not only for the side that has left, it is also a message to us that we Barbadians are awake, we are alert, we are on the watch, and this must not happen to us again. And I want to applaud Barbadians for that. They must now engage in civic action that allows them to be able to ask the questions. That is why I welcome when we introduce question time in Parliament, especially now when we have such a large majority. Barbadians should be able to ask questions that we as parliamentarians get an answer. Explain ourselves. Put the facts. Declare the truth. This is what must happen in Barbados. But for citizens to be engaged in their own democracy, citizens not only have to be informed, having freedom of information, they must also be educated about what are their interests. If they do not understand and appreciate what their interests are, then it is possible that they might think differently and may not be able to appreciate why something has to be done. So one of the things that we have to do as a government is to start the process of not only communicating, but adding into that the education behind it, that people can understand and say the yea and amen when they agree, and to be able to say no when it is not adding up. And this is why, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have to do is find various channels for our citizen participation. I am extremely committed to civic engagement. I can't tell you how fervent I am about the absolute need for people to be engaged. And one of the things I want to compliment our government on is the amount of information they've put in the public domain to be able to help people to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it. But civic engagement must provide opportunities for people to talk, people to have input, people to participate. And in keeping with my fervent wish for that engagement in St. James South, one of the things that we are continuing in that constituency is to ensure that we not only report to the people, but that we give opportunity to them to ask questions. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow at Queen's College at 6 p.m., we're meeting with the constituents so the constituents can raise any questions they may have about the budget, about the sewage, about what has transpired so far. If there are things that they need me to research, to get back to them with an answer so that they know I'm holding myself accountable to them and that our government is being accountable to them. To allow them the opportunity to put their ideas. And I want to encourage every Barbadian, please go on Ideas for Barbados. Put your ideas down. Because we need to get everybody's input into building this nation. And we started that process when we invited people to comment on the integrity bill and asked them to make their voices heard if something wasn't tight enough, if something was too hard, if there was a gap, if there was a loophole. Share with us so that we could ensure that that bill wasn't just a Barbados Labour Party bill, it was a Barbados bill. And that must be a continuing activity where people are able to come and speak with their representative, get the information they need, share the thoughts that they have. It will also be a time, Mr. Speaker, when I will be asking them, what can you do to help take Barbados forward? How do you want to make an input into making Barbados a better place? What can we do together? Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I feel we need to have if we are going to make what we're doing meaningful and produce the result is that Barbados desperately needs a consumer and civic association. If we do not do that, where citizens exert pressure on the system, exert pressure not just on government, but exert pressure on businesses, then what will happen is that people will sit in a room and decide what is best for us, and the attitude will eventually come over, you can take it or lump it. But if we form a strong consumer association, what the citizens will be able to do is to begin to press back when things are done that seek to take things out of their pocket. One of the things that hurts me is that the corruption that has taken place in this country has resulted in losses to the pockets of people because now you've had to use heavy taxation to try to rebalance it.
The honourable member has 2 more minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to encourage citizens. What are the ways do you wish to engage us? How do you want to make inputs? What do you wish to see in your democracy that will help to make Barbados work better for you and work better for your family? I want to encourage every single Barbadian that this is not a time to be afraid. One of the things that was disturbing to me is that when these things were happening, so many people were afraid to speak up. And I could understand the fear because you live in a small society and you can get hurt, you could lose your job and so on. But what came back to me as I thought about that attitude, that if everybody does that, corruption would just be rampant. But the Bible tells us the remedy for this. It says, if any man, he who seeks to save his life, shall lose it. And that is what happens when you feel that you are protecting your job by saying nothing. When you see corruption, that corruption will eventually eat the very job that you are trying to protect. And that is how you will lose it. So I want to encourage Barbadians. This is a time to be brave. This is a time to stand up. This is a time to be bold. This is a time to engage. Not just to watch us as we govern, but to come and partner alongside of us as we govern so that we are able to take Barbados to where it needs to be and that Barbados can work again for everyone. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, that we suspend or adjourn. That we do was the verb. That we defer further debate on this matter, sir, until the time convenient for Parliament. That's it. That's fine.
Second that, Mr. Speaker.
Question is that this bill be deferred for further consideration. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. You think the ayes have it?
Speaker, we commit to reports from select committees.
Mr. Speaker, as you are well aware, on the second occasion of this sitting, we would have made arrangements for several committees to be put in place. It has been drawn to my attention that the minutes reflect that the honourable member for, I believe you yourself, sir, is listed as a member of the committee, but really you should appear in your ex officio capacity. And therefore, I would want to replace the honourable member for St. John with the honourable member for St. Joseph so that we have the full capacity for that particular committee. Sorry, sir, the Management Commission would be the committee in question.
Question is that a change be reflected in the Management Committee, that the member for St. John be removed and that the honorable member for St. Joseph be placed in his stead. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. The amendment is so reflected.
And Mr. Speaker, there's just one other amendment in respect of the committees, and that would be to the Public Accounts Committee. The committee should actually have 8 members, 7 members, but it's official member, so we would ask for the deletion of your name in respect of that committee.
Question is that the Honourable Speaker be removed from the Public Accounts Committee. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Please let the amendment reflect so.
With that, Mr. Speaker, we've come to the end of today's sitting. As the Honourable Attorney General would have indicated, we have deferred consideration of the Integrity in Public Life Bill until next week. And I would ask for the sitting to be adjourned until next week, the 17th of July at 10 a.m.
The question is that this Honourable House be adjourned until the 17th day of July 2018 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until the 17th day of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.